Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. Tom Dutta, like butter. We're here, and I'm excited to bring to you our guest today. But before that, we have a couple announcements. First of all, we're live streaming. What is that? It's the next generation of broadcasting. You know, podcasts, the name iPod came from the Apple device. We're really now shows. So we are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And if you can follow the feeds, give us a subscribe on YouTube. We can get the analytics excited about what you're about to see today and help that show get seen. Now, a little video we're going to put on. It's about 55 seconds. Take a look at this. Very excited about that passion project, my third book. It's a coloring book. What better way in a tough world to bring children and adults together? You'll notice the title, The Talanoa Way. This word is a Pacific Islander word about communication in a very different way. Came out of my doctoral thesis that I'm doing right now at Middlesex University. The book is actually, She Loves It, my professor, Kate McGuire. You want to grab one of those, everybody, on Amazon, and have some fun with the children of the world. That's my passion. The last thing I want to tell you is this, that something remarkable happened to me, and then I'll introduce my guest. It happened last year. I'm going to show you a little clip, sizzle reel I created. It's only a few seconds. You might have recognized in there that had a cap, a baseball cap on a little Canada flag. That was done in July, Canada Day, roughly that weekend. But it was just before me starting a doctoral degree at Middlesex University in London. And what's unique about this for me is 7 miles from the campus is where I was born, in a military base in the UK, and never been back home. It's because of that experience that led me to my guest, and I'm just blessed and honored to tell you some things. This man is remarkable, the depth, and I want you to know as much as I can before we bring him on. He's in the green room. I'm going to introduce you to Professor Kurt Barling. He began his career as an academic at London School of Economics. He was a PhD researcher, then a full-time lecturer in international relations. But in 1989, he said he escaped and began a career as a BBC journalist and broadcaster. Over 60 countries worldwide. He says he cheated death several times. Hopefully he'll talk about that. He said he interviewed scores of senior politicals, presidents, ministers, business figures, notorious criminals, terrorists in the British history. But he's proudest of 5 national awards, and everyone, this is dramatic performance for somebody in journalism. He reported issues on diversity from Africa, Caribbean, North America, and Europe. And he had more awards than any other journalist in his generation. Now that is remarkable. I want to deep dive into journalism just for 30 seconds. The initial reporting, he said he felt, was biased and decided this would be a good place to deploy his knowledge into action. This came after doing some work on a documentary, a BBC documentary, and we're going to get really deep into that with him. Over the 25 years across BBC and Channel 4 News, Current Affairs, he reported and produced for assignment the Money Program, Today, Newsnight, Moneybox, Black Britain, The One Show, BBC News, and Dispatches. And he spent over a decade and the BBC's special correspondent in London. Now, we're not done yet. Since 2014, he's been a professor at Middlesex University, which is why I'm so honored to have brought him here. That's where I met him. Senior leadership team as well there, theme director of enterprise and culture, award-winning journalist and documentary maker. I think some of the work I see here on terrorism, child abuse, religious institutions, deaths in custody, modern child slavery, this stuff all resonates with my heart, everybody. And over 2,000 stories. When I invited Kurt to the show, I said, tell me why you're a good fit. He said, I've been telling stories for 2,000 years. I went, okay, I guess that must be it. He's written 4 books. We'll get into that in the story. And since 2001, he's done community work. I love this. He's a contributor to the Park Theatre. He's a regular contributor in the UK International TV Radio. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I just got to tell you that he's a highly educated man, several degrees, a master's, and he's fluent in English, French, and German, so he's got me on that. And finally, we all talk about AI, his research work looking at the impact of AI on the future of journalism. I'm very interested in that. He's also a judge on several awards, such as BAFTA, Media Awards for the RTF, Press Gazette Awards. Are you excited? Kurt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. That's interesting. My life flashing before me.
Yes.
My past life flashing before me.
You know, I was blown away actually when I went through that bio, and the first thing I thought about is that look at him. You're so young. Father Time's been good to you. After this, I was expecting a guy with a long beard and gray hair and lots of wrinkles. So
yeah, that's why I keep my hair short. It's not so grey. Keep my beard short. Keep it trim. But
yeah.
yes, I'm a man of considerable years now, having been in the business of trying to tell stories for the best part of 40 years.
It's amazing. Well, it's an honor to have you here. So let's get right into it. The narrative of the show is about storytelling. Let's go back, take us back to the beginning. Tell us about your story, how it all began. Go back as young as you want.
It began before the beginning, in actual fact. My grandfather was a father of the chapel, which, as some of your listeners, viewers may know, is the head union person in the workplace. And he was the father of the chapel in the Daily Mail newspaper in Fleet Street, in the print room. He was a printer. So they had a lot of power back in the day when you didn't make money if you didn't get the papers onto the street. And of course, the printers were able to pull the plug quite quickly. So if they pulled the plug and they didn't get the papers printed, the proprietors of the newspaper would panic and up their wages. Very powerful union. And he was in that role for the best part of 40 years. And that was interrupted by the Second World War, where he served in the Royal Navy. When I was a little boy, he would take me into the Daily Mail, to the events that they used to have for family. It was that kind of newspaper. And I would get very excited because it was a really noisy, smelly place, but lots of camaraderie going on in the print room, all those massive machines. And I was very impressed with that. And he took me to one side and he said, listen, son, that's not what you want to be impressed with. You want to be impressed with the people who sit up there. Yeah. And of course, I wasn't quite sure how far he meant up there, but he didn't mean all the way up there. He just meant on the next floor. That's where all the journalists sat. So he planted that seed in my head from a very early age. Okay, so fast forward to me being at university, deciding what I want to do with my life beyond university. I decided I would like to go into television broadcasting. Why television? I'd been in the National Youth Theatre as a teenager. The National Youth Theatre of Great Britain was an opportunity to express yourself on the stage. I was a young black boy. The theatre company was predominantly upper middle class white people. And I recognized that I had a gift, but I didn't want to spend that gift in theatre for it didn't appeal to me, that kind of lifestyle, moving from place to place. So I decided to do a degree, did my undergraduate, did my master's, did my PhD, ended up at the LSE on the books there as a lecturer in international relations, but was still hungry to tell stories. And in 1985, okay, we're winding the clock back quite a few years there. Some of those listeners and viewers won't even know what 1985 looked like because they weren't born at that point. But in 1985, we had a massive riot in London, and not far from where I live now, and not far from where I lived then. And it ended up with a police officer being murdered.
That was at Broadwater.
Broadwater Farm.
That's
Broadwater
right.
Farm. And it's entered into the folklore of the Metropolitan Police. It's entered into the folklore of the relations between black communities and the police, because it was such a brutal event, both in terms of the aftermath, obviously the murder of the police officer, but the aftermath of 350 plus people arrested, some of them brutalized in police stations and the like. And what I discovered looking at that material, I happened to be at that location on the day the riots broke out.
Yeah.
I was not there to dispense with Molotov cocktails. I was there on family business, and I just happened to get caught up in the beginning of it. And then I saw the reporting, the storytelling about the Broadwater Farm riots on the mainstream media, and I was pretty horrified. I was a young man, quite idealistic. And I said to myself, this is shocking, the way in which they're portraying this story, portraying the people, the community that's at the middle of this riot. And if I'm going to do something sensible with my learning, I need to reconnect myself with that idea that I become a journalist. Of course, I'd embarked on a PhD, which takes time, but I'd kind of settled in my mind I would end up, once I'd completed my PhD, going into journalism. And I ended up literally within a week of having sat my PhD viva in 1989 with NBC, the American network news, as a researcher. Shortly after that, I ended up on a program called Heart of the Matter on BBC, which was a documentary program. And it just so happened I landed in early November 1989. And of course, we all remember, because we're all great historians, what happened in November 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And as luck would have it, I was the only person in that team that spoke German. So I was dispatched quickly, not just when there was no thought about it. It was like, here's your plane ticket, get on the plane. We want a documentary made from East Germany, and it's going to be broadcast in 2 weeks' time. You get on the ground, find the people, find the story, and my career was off.
Wow. How old were you at that moment in time? That's amazing.
I was 27 at that point. I completed my PhD. I had a good intellectual grounding in what the world was about. I had an understanding of the concepts, but I had no clue about being on the ground as a journalist. So it was a serious baptism of fire. It was chaos there. It was anarchy there at the Berlin Wall. But, you know, when I look back, and I thought at the time, having made that film, I've watched the film since then, and it still stands the test of time. It's still a cracking good story being told. And it's resonated over those intervening years as something which really captured the moment. It was a 40-minute film. And obviously I made it with a team of people. But I thought at the time, I wonder if I'll ever have the opportunity to be in such a dramatic moment, historic moment, global moment in my career. And although I did encounter lots of big moments in my career, 9/11 being another big moment, the tube bombings in London being another big moment, it's hard to capture that moment of transformation, which was the Berlin Wall falling. Partly emotionally for me, because I was raised in an Anglo-German household, so it had lots of resonances for me. A bit like you with your story about Fiji, when you touched by something like Fiji and the indentured laborers coming from India, you want to deep dive into that. Well, that was the same for me with the Berlin Wall. I wanted to deep dive into what was going on. And therefore, it was transformational. It made me realize in that moment that it doesn't matter how complex and complicated and vexed the world is, it can change. We have the power to change. And often the route to change is through the power of stories and telling those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody, we're here with Professor Kurt Barling, and Kurt, my mind went on journeys in so many directions. I'm just going to riff with you on this, and we'll keep you going in the story. You know, one of the things we talk about is the influences of context when I'm doing my thesis, and you know a lot about this because you're at Middlesex, and it's connecting all the dots. And I go back to, I mean, there's such passion that comes out of you about this love for what you do. Go back to your childhood. Sometimes they say, and I've met people who they say there's a chip on my shoulder, or there was a gut punch, or there was something I experienced when I was younger. You know, maybe it was good, maybe it was not so good. Talk about the influences of your parents, and what was your chip? What drove you? I mean, because man, to go into war zones and do what you did, it takes a very special mindset. What drove you?
I think initially what drove me was the context of being brought up in 1960s and 1970s Britain in a hostile environment. As a person of color, you were often seen as other, depicted as other, told you were other. You never quite fitted in, even though you felt you fitted in. There were those who were concerned to make sure that you didn't fit in. I wrote a book a few years back called The R Word. It's about racism. And it wasn't autobiographical. It was sort of how to understand racism and the impact racism has on our societies. The way in which the language of racism has trapped us in a way of thinking about race, even though most people accept that race is a defunct concept. And as a child growing up in Britain in a predominantly white society, you very much felt that you needed to be able to tell your story, but you were constantly being told that you can't tell your story because your story didn't matter. And not just your personal story, but the context within which you were raised, the African origins story. If you're Caribbean, the Caribbean origins story. If you're from India, the Indian origins story. And that was very much suppressed. It wasn't an accepted part of national discourse in Britain. And of course, that puts in you a fire in your belly because you're constantly wanting to challenge, constantly wanting to stand up for yourself. And some people said, you've got a chip on your shoulder. You said, no, it's not a chip on the shoulder. It's 101 chips on both shoulders. But I'm chipping away at getting rid of those chips by understanding my positionality in this society. And the only way I can identify and establish my positionality in this society is to go through each of those chips one by one and make sure that they're dealt with. And so, growing up, it was a question of trying to find yourself and locate yourself in a society which basically told you you didn't belong. Now, Britain's moved on.
Yeah.
Britain is no longer that kind of society. I mean, bear in mind, when I was born, we're talking pre-civil rights in the United States. Definitely we're talking pre-civil rights in the United Kingdom. Probably that whole civil rights thing didn't really start in the United Kingdom until the Brixton riots in 1981. So we're talking about a slower transition, if you will, in the United Kingdom than in the United States. And so that informs your sense of self and your sense of your relationship with the society in which you engage. Of course, I was raised as a German speaker, so I always had that sense of there was part of me which was other, which people didn't get.
Yeah.
My name is Kurt, as people can see, Germanic. I would tell people on the phone, often, yes, I'm Kurt Barling, and I'll be along for the job interview tomorrow morning. And you turn up and they walk straight past you and say, oh, well, we were waiting for Kurt Barling to come in. I'll tell you a funny story there, actually, whilst we're on that.
By the way, so at some point, say something in German. I just want to hear the difference.
Ich kann gut Deutsch. Ich habe Deutsch gesprochen, als ich ein kleines Kind war, als 4 Jahre alt. Und so kann ich immer noch Deutsch sprechen. Und ich kann mir gut erklären auf Deutsch. Und das ist die...
Amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So I got to the point when I became a journalist where I was able to leverage my intellect, leverage my ability to talk and to tell stories and get people involved in the stories that I wanted to tell. There was a very famous politician in the United Kingdom called Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell in 1968 that gave a very dramatic speech called it's become known as the Rivers of Blood speech. Basically, his contention was Britain is becoming so brownified that it's going to create rivers of blood of conflict. It was a speech which got him kicked out of the Conservative Party. Basically, it put him onto the sidelines of mainstream politics, but he had a lot of following. Now, when I shortly after I did the film in Germany in 1989, I did another film on the impact of the wall coming down, and we did it in Yugoslavia. And I invited Enoch Powell to be a participant on a program we were making for the BBC. And he said, yes, Dr. Barling, I'd like to meet you first before I commit myself to this esteemed program. And I'd like you to meet me at my favorite restaurant in Queensgate, just behind the Royal Albert Hall, and we can talk about that further. And I said, no problem, Mr. Powell. I'll be happy to do that. And I turned up on the allotted day at the allotted time, 5 minutes early, being German. And I said approached him with my hand extended, and he said to me, that's very nice. But where's Dr. Barling? I really would like to engage with him. And I said, well, Mr. Powell, you're looking at him.
Wow.
You could see the shock on his face.
Unbelievable.
In fact, the shock on the people in the restaurant, all you could hear was the clink of cutlery on crockery when we walked into the room, because this guy really had a reputation for basically not liking black people. I mean, I don't think that was true, to be honest, but the point is that was what he symbolized. Apart from the fact, of course, at the time, he was in his mid-70s and I was in my early 20s or late 20s, pretty fit, and it must have caused quite a spectacle. Anyway, I digress. The point is that being different in a society that sees that difference as something problematic informs your attitude towards what it is you want to eventually contribute. And remember, my grandfather planted the seed about journalism, not because of my color. My grandfather was a working class white man, but in terms of, okay, that would be a good place for me to tell stories that I'm interested in telling, which help reshape our image of ourselves. And I think for much of my career, I was gravitating towards stories which aim to help people in Britain understand that we are who we are because of where we've come from, or where our forebears have come from, in your case from Fiji, or before Fiji from India. And I think it's very important, even in Canada, it's important that Canada, which claims to be a multi-ethnic community, I've been to Canada, so I can vouch for its integrity on that grounds, that actually it's no point in just seeing, it's about being. And you can't be if you don't understand the origin story. The origin story of Great Britain, of course, or United Kingdom, is an imperial story, starting with Elizabeth I. When our ships went off to the New World, went off to the Caribbean, went off to what's now the United States of America, went off to India, and extracted goods and wealth from Africa. That is what made Britain what it is, made the United Kingdom what it is. It gave it its wealth base. And yet those people who came from those places were always somehow seen as other. And you have to remind people, we made this country.
Yeah.
The people on these islands who've been on these islands for several hundred years also made this country. But the empire made this country. Perhaps some people might think it's the empire striking back now that we have so many people here, but that's the reality of it. And we need to be comfortable with that. And I think through my career, I always wanted to help people navigate that. There were particular stories that I used to focus on and come back to time and time again in order to reinforce that body of work, to reinforce that narrative. I wasn't doing propaganda. I was a BBC journalist, but I was just gravitating towards stories which helped me unpack that connection with the past, which makes us who we are in the present.
No, I just love that everybody. Kurt Barling here. Hey, Kurt, I love the German accent. Sometime before we wrap up today, do the French one too, because that's going to make my day. You're quite the storyteller. You know, the start going all over the place in my mind again. That's how my mind works. It jumps quadrants, and I still have some latency from my concussion. So sometimes I'll ramble. You just cut me off. But the thing that I wrote down here when you said bias, man, some of the things you said in your story, and you're so brilliant because when you talk and tell stories. I wrote this in my draft of one of my papers. Is that the more I hear your story, the more I learn about myself, and you know, I became a manager in the banking industry here in Canada at age 21. CEO was my first senior role at age 31. Did you know that I had a vice president from Germany? His name was Kurt as well. I'm no relation to you. And in front of my staff, I was referred to as the token nigger. Now think about that. And that's why you see, everybody, what's happening here is Kurt's telling a story and it's going into my brain and it's pulling up thoughts and emotions, and there's this oxytocin flooding me. And I feel like I like this guy. I don't want to talk some more. That's the power of narrative. But back then, Kurt, there was no brown guys or people of color up in the boardrooms. And so my journey through all of this, I didn't quite understand. See, my dad left home when I was 12. He was quite a drunk, quite a violent man. He died in 18, Kurt, but I honor him. I love him, actually. And I think, you know, his childhood was a lot like maybe mine because his father had that same drinking issue. But, you know, my mom and dad taught us that, you know, you stand up to nobody's better than you. And so going into this world, navigating, I see a world of less color. And today it's completely transformed. But what I didn't realize until you were talking more in your story is something's been driving me, and it's something that's been, you know, kind of pushing me forward to discover more. And it came up in discussion in my doctoral that I've been like a modern day Siddhartha, if you know anything about Hess's work, that I've been lost. And many people like me have been lost, and yet people sometimes will say to me, Kurt, you've done all these things, and when we look at you on the outside, and I'm going like, you know, I lost a big part of my life in a world where I didn't quite understand how to navigate it. And so that's why I do what I do, and I'm dig deeper into understanding more about those stories. I want to get into something you said about bias, and I got to tell the audience here, Kurt, that I had to move this interview, everyone, a couple times. You've been so accommodating. I appreciate it because of the heat. We're in a heat wave. But something happened remarkable in the world, the attempted assassination of a president in the U.S., and it's been really bugging me about this word bias. It's came up in my research as well. Just want to throw a few things out and have you talk to me about it. That there's facts and then there's opinion. There's a fellow in the U.S., Bill O'Reilly, who used to be with Fox News, who has started. He's been working on it for years, but he has something called the No Spin News. And he reported, I look at it a lot, and he reported just recently that when the assassination happened, he had 4 million people view his feed, and he's on TV and also social media with that thing all over the world. 4 million people, he says. But the point is that he'll make statements like, you know, I'm not going to report it unless it's fact. If you can't attach a name to it, don't. You hear some of the other media, the mainstream, particularly in the United States, and I won't mention all of them, will say, you know, according to an anonymous source. And then, you know, as I watch this and as I go from mainstream to YouTube and social media and find other sources, you find that there's hate and vitriol behind a lot of the statements that are being made. And so the average or the ordinary person in the world today just wants to find truth. And I saw something that was in your bio. It says, my knowledge into action. And listening to all of this that you said, I want to throw one more thing up on the screen just for you to look at. This is actually not promoting. Oh, shoot. I don't think you can. Can you see that? It's an overlay. I don't think you can see it.
Who is it?
Let me come back to that later. For some reason, I can't get that to show properly. But I guess I want to come back to what you said about that 1985. What was it that appeared to be biased to you? And then when you hear things such as what I've just said and the term fake news and all this, it's such a confusing time. What's the future of media and how do we navigate all of this?
I think it's very easy if you're a journalist on the ground to assert things, and that assertion is rooted in your own bias, rather than looking at what's in front of you and trying to weigh what's in front of you and what's stimulated what's in front of you, how to interpret what's in front of you through a more critical lens. You can enter into the world of assertion, particularly if it's a crisis. And when you're in a riot situation, it's a crisis. So you'll say things like, the black community do things like this, or young men, young black men do things like that. So you're asserting things, which is introducing your own bias. I mean, how does the mainstream media traditionally deal with that? It's not by saying anonymous sources, it's by verifying information.
Yeah.
The classic way of doing it is by identifying an event, trying to get more than one source to verify that that's the way in which the event has come to pass, and then report that. Of course, we're in a world where the timelines on reporting have gone from sometimes hours or days to seconds, and therefore it's very difficult to ensure that those methods of verification are robust. The mainstream players in the United States, in Canada, and the United Kingdom, we know who they are.
Yeah.
The CBCs, the NBCs, the ABCs, the BBCs, the ITVs will do their best to have robust systems of verification. There are those who have no interest in having robust systems of verification, because actually they have identified their truth and want to tell their truth. There is no one truth for many stories, because many stories are in a swirl of ideology or in a swirl of mixed messages, and therefore there cannot be one truth. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, for example. Very difficult in that circumstance to say, well, here's the truth. Somehow you have to stand back from that and identify angles on the story, and try and make sure that those angles on the story can be verified. It's a challenging world that we live in the media space, a very challenging world. But lots of the mainstream are doing their damnness to try and use the tools available to them, particularly digital tools available to them, to make sure those basic principles like verification are adhered to. There are, people like or organizations like the Neiman Lab in the United States, which can outline what it is, the principles, if you like, of journalistic output, what governs those principles, what governs the sort of first principles of what we're trying to achieve. And you overlay those principles with methods of trying to ensure that you adhere to those principles, whether it be abiding by particular ethics, abiding by particular methods. I think there's a big effort to make sure that information put before the public is verifiable information.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I just pulled up that quote here. I'm just going to read it, if you don't mind. I'm looking off my iPad off the screen here, Kurt. And so Bill O'Reilly actually appeared on another talk show with another host, and this, let me just find it here. America is awash with media haters who want to harm their political opponents, not best them using facts. We have become a mean country with massive assistance from social media. Cowards now can throw vicious rhetorical bombs without consequence. And he basically just goes on to talk about. I'm sorry, it was Jon Stewart. That was the Daily Show. So these guys kind of are now. You see the whole media, some of the feeds out there since what happened in the U.S. The people who are putting out all this garbage, all of a sudden there's some of the media that just for days they didn't know how to cover it. And so what advice do you give guys like me who are now taking my work into media? I have people come on my show, the live streaming, and they'll say something and I can't fact check it. I try to do my research before. As a journalist yourself, give some advice to people in the industry like me who are up and coming.
Well, quite often what happens in the UK, if you're on a live broadcast, you'll know the parameters of what you can say if you're a professional. But secondly, there'll be somebody, you're in a self-op studio, so there's no producer there to have your second set of ears. But if you've got a controversial person on your show, you probably need a second set of ears. It's very difficult as a live broadcaster to be thinking about the next question, listening to what the person is saying, and thinking about how you can exit if that person says something which is controversial or even illegal, or libelous. So, that's why the BBC tends to have a producer on hand listening to the output of the show, making sure that if there anything is, they remind the presenter, can you pick the person up on that? Can you clarify that that's not a point of view which is accepted by everybody? Can you challenge the person on that point? And that's the way in live broadcasting often that issue is dealt with.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just put up it's on my big screen in the back there, but there was somebody who referred me to a new app called Smart News. Apparently this is run out of Japan, but things like this they're saying are more fact-based, etc. But it's very interesting. I kind of use the analogy of the natural health products industry, where you walk into a store of natural health products and you have a headache and you're looking for a product, and there's so many on the shelf you can't figure out where do I look, what do I go to. Hey, Kurt, take us back. You said something about knowledge into action. What do you mean by that?
So that comes out of my work at the university and the question of what is university for? Yeah. And universities, hail back to the Middle Ages. They were initially institutes of learning of the Gospels, or in the Islamic world, of the Quran. And so people were set to interpreting the word of God and giving it meaning. And for many centuries, that's what universities did. We got to the Enlightenment and universities transformed into places of broader learning. The natural sciences came along, the social sciences came along, the political sciences came along. And eventually we develop an understanding that universities are there to somehow benefit society, somehow to bring us knowledge where we can improve the societies we live in. Of course, it was also a proofing school for the elites to get their children into the best jobs and the best situations, give them the best opportunities in life. Universities have been somewhat democratized over the past 50 years. You get many more young people going to university. There are many different aspirations for what university is about. So universities have to think hard about what it is they do in a modern civil society. And for me and Middlesex, we are very much a civic institution with a civic mission, which means that the knowledge that we gather and the knowledge that we create within the university space has to have some service to that civic mission. Yeah. And what that means is knowledge must have a purpose. It must be the kind of knowledge which we can put into action. Might be from the natural sciences, might be medical research, it might be in the social sciences, sociological research oriented towards policy. It might be in the economic sciences, how we understand how businesses and micro businesses operate. Might be in the creative arts, thinking about how we can, use the spoken word or theatrical performance to transform our lives. So it's about saying university is there for a purpose, and the purpose for us is it puts knowledge into action. Now, knowledge isn't confined, it's a very broad idea, and the translation of that into action takes a lot of effort. It takes a fundamental understanding that that's the purpose of the mission. It's not just to be. When I was at LSE, for example, back in the 1980s, we had a bar where the students and staff, particularly postgraduate students, would spend lots of time there drinking ale and other things. Sometimes they spend the whole evening there and be talking complete nonsense by the end of it because they'd had too much to drink. But one of the themes that constantly came up was some people said, the majority of people even said, knowledge is a thing in itself, and it's just a good knowledge for knowledge's sake is a good thing anyway. And I wasn't of that view. I was from a humble working class background. I said, if I'm going to have knowledge, I want to do something with it. Remember the story of Broadwater Farm.
Yeah.
If I've got this knowledge, I must deploy it somehow for some public benefit. And I think, knowledge created in universities can be a public good. If we want our societies to be more equitable, we want better social justice, we want greater prosperity, we want to make our communities sustainable, you have to do with that, with expertise. The expertise has to be based on the accumulation of knowledge, and new knowledge has to be shared. That is knowledge into action. We will not face the challenges of the world if we do not have a process by which we can take new knowledge and turn it into action, which actually makes a change in the world in which we inhabit. We're trying to keep, sustainable.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, everybody. With Professor Kurt Barling here. Kurt, I'm approaching 300 interviews now on the show. I started this thing just in 2017 after I wrote my first book, and it was like, I'm going to get people on, guys like Kurt, and just tell stories and just talk back and forth. I don't know. I had no idea how to do a podcast. I was self-taught until I figured it out with some help. But I was told, Kurt, that most podcasts fail after 9 episodes or don't cross 10 because the host lack of curation of content. What I'm finding is just by starting a show that has a story narrative, I've got my 60% of the guests that are being sent by booking agents. I'm getting people from all over the world. I'm booked out to the end of September, October. So it's almost overwhelming for me. And there's a part of me that wants to critique my work, wants to say, Tom, are you doing this right? So one of the things I want to ask you, if you'll do this for me, is after the show, give me some critique on the work you see that I'm doing through the show. Going back to your bio, you talk about investigative report work that you've been doing. I love the some of the things you said here. I'm just going to read it back to you. Maybe you can tell us a story or talk about this work. I'm a multi-award-winning investigative journalist and documentary maker, reputation for incisive journalism, working on major investigations, sometimes undercover, into terrorism, child abuse, religious institutions, deaths in custody, modern child slavery. I reported more than 2,000 stories for the BBC. But just that work there, I'm fascinated by it. I want to hear a story. Just tell us about that work.
Well, of course, there is daily journalism where you go into the newsroom, you get in at 9 o'clock in the morning, you sit in the news meeting, and somebody says, this is a good story for the day. You've got to get it on by 1 o'clock or 6 o'clock. Go out and gather and come back and put it together. That's one kind of journalism, daily journalism. My original work in journalism, program making, was in current affairs, which was much more long form. And so I always lent into doing work which wasn't obvious. So for example, in 1999, I was visiting my father-in-law in a town in the west of England called Bristol. And in the local paper, I read something about a local imam having been arrested, convicted, and then released. And he was convicted of child sexual abuse in the local mosque. Yeah. And that piqued my curiosity. Partly piqued my curiosity because it wasn't on the front page. It was on sort of page 6 in the local paper at the bottom in a little short news in brief. I went to investigate that. That turned into a very long 2-year investigation into the way in which Britain's mosques were being governed. Yeah. So the governance structures. And one of the mosques I got involved with exploring was Finsbury Park Mosque. Now, for some of your listeners, viewers, they may recall that Finsbury Park Mosque was at the very heart of the birth of British jihadism. And nobody really knew what was going on inside that mosque. An investigator's instinct is to get inside the mosque, but to get inside the mosque and then report on what you found, you have to have good material, right? Particularly if you're a television journalist, you have to go through a process of legitimizing your approach to wanting to secretly film, which we did. We got permissions, took a long time, and eventually we filmed undercover in that mosque. And what we discovered was something deeply unsettling, deeply troubling. And we reported on that. We reported on that in a documentary called Trouble at the Mosque in 2001. In fact,
Wow.
we'd fine cut the movie, an hour-long movie. We fine cut it in August 2001. Then, of course, the next month, 9/11 happened, and the program was pulled. It eventually got shown the following year, but it was pulled because people thought it might be too inflammatory.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about that story, that investigation, which took us 2 years, and we hit the nail on the head, it was described by Muslim communities as a seminal piece of work because we lifted the lid on something that many people in those communities were concerned about for many, many years. We got people to think hard about how they should rectify that problem. Now, next spring on Netflix, there's going to be a 4-part series.
Yeah.
And part of that 4-part series is using my testimony and my secret filming in Finsbury Park Mosque. So the power of investigation and the power of storytelling travels over the years. Remember, that's 25 years ago.
Absolutely.
And because it's such a powerful story,
Yeah.
and the way in which we told the story was so powerful, new story makers are coming back to use that method and to use me as the originator of that story as a key part of that storytelling process. Stories never die. Good stories never die.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going back in time. Every time I do a show, I'm telling a story that comes back from even before my birth. I'm just looking at the bio again. There's something here, Europe, Land of Jihad, 3-part series. Man, what you just said about that, wearing cameras and going undercover, I want to ask you about that. So just draw a picture for the audience. Where was the camera hidden somewhere on your body? And then you wrote in here something about cheating death. That's one of my curiosity. You've done so much work like this. Tell us a story about that.
To the global south,
Yeah.
as a journalist, often you're looking for trouble, right? You're not going there just to tell nice stories. You're a news journalist, so you're going there looking for the trouble spots.
Yes.
Unfortunately, when you head to a trouble spot, you get troubled people. There were times when I found myself in either conflict zones or places where the government was no longer in control, and the army was threatening to, take over the government. And there are occasions when I literally had AK-47 stuck on my head, basically being threatened to have my brains blown out. Now, is it worth the risk? Well, let me tell you, the last time that happened, I changed my mind about how I was going to go about prosecuting my job as a journalist, because I had 3 young children, and I decided that was not for me any longer. I didn't want AK-47s at my head. So in that sense, I cheated death. But that didn't mean I wasn't prepared to take risks. Finsbury Park Mosque was a massive risk. Fortunately, the cameras in the early days of secret filming, when you had those sort of JVC cams with little cassettes in them, it was bulky, but you
remember those.
A big jacket, and look pretty tough, and go in and try and capture. But the cameras were rubbish, the audio was rubbish, so it was all a bit, iffy. But of course, with digital, things are transformed. You wouldn't believe the footage that we shot 25 years ago, the clarity and quality of the image and the audio, based on a very tiny recording device. I mean, Of course, now people can do it with the mobile phones and all sorts. And but the point about secret filming is not to go and catch people unawares, just to make their life a misery. And in the UK, and I'm sure in the United States and Canada too, there are very strict protocols that you have to go to justify secret filming. By the way, if you find evidence in the United Kingdom as a result of your secret filming, you have to present that evidence to the person you've secretly filmed to give them a right to reply. then only when they refuse to give you a right to reply can you go ahead and, if it's in the public interest, show that material. So they're very strict guidelines on how you can use that material. And we followed those strict guidelines. And as a consequence of that, Abu Hamza was convicted eventually.
Yeah.
And as many people will know, he's now serving a life sentence in Supermax in Colorado somewhere.
Well, I got to honor you, man. You got, they say, balls of steel. You just telling that story, and I'm visualizing the gun to your head and just what goes through your mind, and even to do the type of work you do, that's pretty amazing to me. I was thinking about the thing about the filming when you told that, a story triggered. The Republican National Convention they have, which I have an interest in it only because of what's going on with that story around the government, the change there that might happen. And they had this couple come on. They were married 60 years. They're farmers somewhere on the border of Texas. And apparently they have they put hidden cameras, and they showed the footage at the convention of 3,500, over a period of time, 3,500 mules in camouflage, these people coming across the border carrying whatever, their backpacks, drugs, whatever. I was blown away, and that's one of the things that is so different for me. When I grew up as a kid, like many of us, we didn't have TV. We didn't have all this. And now you get things like that coming out, and it scares the crap out of you, or you look at it and you say, oh my God, why is this happening? And then you talk about responsible journalism. Should that be reported like that, on a screen in a convention? People are going to interpret it different ways. It's just a different world. And that brings me to something you said to me. Remember, I posted on LinkedIn this show, and I said, what can the audience learn from you? What's one thing? I think you used the word discourse. I apologize because that disappeared on the feed. Something about being able to debate or have conversation or discourse in a respectful. Just tell us about what you were trying to say to me there. I think if you remember that.
We're different. Remember, we started this conversation talking about difference.
Yeah.
Talking about your folks from Fiji and formerly from India, my folks from Germany, from Africa. That brings difference, right? That's a very obvious difference. There are many other differences.
That's
There
right.
are gender differences, there are differences of sexuality, and all the rest of it. But the reality is we are all very different. We have common ground, we have common cause, sometimes we have a common heritage with people, but fundamentally as groups of people we have differences, and we need to learn to negotiate those differences civilly, because if we don't negotiate those differences civilly, they can very quickly become polarized, and then they become points of contention, anger, even conflict. And one of the things that I was trying to say was we need to learn to disagree well. In other words, we don't have to agree with everybody in order to live our lives peacefully, but we do have to disagree well, and we have to find the mechanisms for disagreeing well. In a place like Canada, you have Parliament. In a place like Britain, you have Parliament. In a place like America, you have Congress. And those are the places for the big issues to get people to think about how to disagree well. And of course, at the local level, you do it through local government, local authorities, do it in school, through committees, do it in businesses, through committees of learning how to have a discourse where you are critical thinkers and you challenge, you say why, you say no sometimes. You want explanation, but it's not explanation for conflict. It's explanation so that you can learn to negotiate your differences. And if you can't get to a resolution, you disagree well, you go away, you come back another time to try and negotiate this difference. Life is all about trying to find, civil life is all about trying to find ways to negotiate our differences, because we are different. We will never get rid of those differences. As a consequence of not being able to get rid of those differences, which actually makes the world a more interesting place. Diversity gives us vibrancy, gives us a reason to be excited about life. But with that diversity comes a responsibility to learn how and teach how to navigate the world with all those differences and finding ways of disagreeing well. If we can do that, then we can have a more civil society. Just look at the transition of government in Britain in the last 2 weeks. We've gone from a very hostile, dysfunctional government into a new government. Within days, the discourse has changed. Parliament has given us the opportunity, and the elections have given us an opportunity to actually disagree well. It may not be perfect. It may be the best that we've got so far, but at least it gives us the opportunity not to pick up arms and fight with each other and create great harm to each other. It helps us perhaps navigate a new path. We may still disagree. I'm sure we will. But nevertheless, we're navigating a new path because we've been able to negotiate our differences. That's the big challenge for humankind. It's part of the human condition. And so disagreeing well is an important message, which I always try and get across to my students. Doesn't matter if you disagree with somebody. It doesn't matter if someone disagrees with you, but disagree well. Move, sleep on it, come back the next day, and make sure that at the heart of all you do, you're always trying to negotiate those differences.
No, I think it's great, and thank you for sharing all that. Your students are lucky to have you, Kurt. And one of the things I've experienced, the first time I met Kurt, everyone, was when we were in a cohort every 2 weeks to London. I'm in Vancouver. Kurt was speaking, and I learned some things about that. I learned so much in the first year at the university, listening to people communicate. Actually, the first time, one of my other professors, Kate, who said, "Thank you for your provocation." And I listened to that, and I come from the business sector. And it's like, if you're in the business sector, there's so many egos. If somebody provokes somebody else, it ends up into battle royale. I mean, you just don't have those healthy debates, especially with the structure in many companies. And that's kind of where I come from. So, learning a lot about that. Just a couple more things as we move to wrapping up today with you. I could probably have you back again. There's so much that you're teaching us. The word Talanoa. Are you familiar with that Pacific Islander word at all?
I am now.
Well said. There's another learning point. All right, agree, even if you don't know. Talanoa is Pacific Islander. There's a research paper on it I can send you if you're interested. And I didn't know this about my culture, but the Tongans, Samoans, and the Fijians, they still today use Talanoa. So back in the days, Fiji particularly were roots of cannibalism and tribal elders and chiefs. So Talanoa is basically the elders would come into a circle. They would sit in a circle on the ground. I read in the article that you would have to be invited into that. And if you were invited into it, Kurt, it meant that you agreed to bring your ancestry stories, your heritage. You brought in beliefs and views from the village, where perhaps the women who were raising the children, but you brought all that into the Talanoa. Number two is, which is different for me in North America, there's no positionality. There's no preset agenda. In Talanoa, they coined the phrase talk, talk, talk. So you sit in a circle, talk, 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 then they just keep going around and around until everybody's talked. And if you wanted to talk about something that was even not related to the topic of the day, that's okay. What it says in Talanoa is that what comes out of it is a deeper understanding and love for human being. And back in my dad, when he was alive, he used to have a little rag called the Fiji Canada Times. He used to write that. I remember my dad said to me one day, Kurt, he said, if you ever go to Fiji, watch out, because you might be on a list somewhere of people might not like you. He was very outspoken about human rights, my dad. And they used Talanoa to actually deal through one of the coups that they had in Fiji. So this all started to fascinate me. And then I started thinking about, okay, can you bring that type of dialogue into media? I tend to see, if I watch some of the media, you see a host who appears to be somebody who's being handed, and I may be wrong, you can tell me if I am, some type of a position. You have this as the position, and then you have a couple of guests, and there's people who are from both sides of the issue, and there's a lot of yelling and screaming, but just so much doesn't get said. And yet I wonder, if you were the host of a future media show and you brought in some of the things you just said about discourse and having those conversations and hearing each other, I wonder how you might see that. Is that possible? Can we get to that point? Or
well, despite the fact that I've been talking a lot because you've been asking questions, I don't actually like the sound of my own voice. And the reality is, the presenters on most programs have to like the sound of their own voice. So,
really?
Yeah. But Talanoa as a concept is very common. in pastoral societies. You call it an oral tradition in other societies. In Africa, you have lots of oral traditions. In India, you have lots of oral traditions. In Australia, in the Aboriginal folk, original Australians have oral traditions. Oral traditions, by the way, which require that constant coming together to explore each other's positionality, because there was no written word. They didn't write things down. So it's really important that community got bounded by understanding what was going on in the community. And so it was like a forum for, a political forum, social forum, where people could explore each other's positionality and come to a better understanding of the community they lived in. And they'd pass that down. Some people in the Dalinara would have been younger, and so they'd go away. They'd learn that method of imparting knowledge. That's again about knowledge interaction, knowledge exchange. That's what they were doing. And I think in many traditional societies, that's the way they remained civil with each other. Of course, in many traditional societies, they didn't always remain civil, by the way. Right. There was quite a lot of beating around the head in lots of those societies, but it was their way of trying to have what we might think of as parliament. It might be more local, though, or local government. Instead of local government, they have a circle and they engage with each other and resolve disputes. Often those places would also be a venue for resolving disputes. There's a lot to be said for that, but I suspect in a world like ours, that isn't going to cut the mustard. Particularly, on big topics of the day or in the media space, is not going to cut the mustard. That's not to suggest that we shouldn't be doing that kind of thing locally, within families, within local communities, having good places where people can come and talk, exchange ideas, and negotiate their differences.
No, I love it. And in mental health, that's a big deal too. I mean, you hear about peer groups, and it's really talk. You go and you have a group and you share. One thing I want to ask you on the list here was about your research in AI. Off your bio, it says, my current research work looks at the impact of artificial intelligence on the future of journalism. Just tell us about that quickly.
Well, the important thing to remember about AI is that it's the interaction between the computer and the human space. And AI gives us affordances because of the speed with which it can gather data, the speed at which it can interpret data, and the speed at which it can deliver an outcome. And that's the key, grappling with what does that change about our lives, for example, negotiating our differences. If we can gather the kind of quantities of data, work out what that data means, come up with a set of analysis from that data, and then present that data. So, for example, everyone's probably who's watching or listening to this, has used ChatGPT. AI drives is the kind of intellectual, it's not intellectual because it's a computer, but it's able to take the data that's available to us from the past to answer a question you might use to prompt it. And that actually can be quite useful. It's not useful if we don't harness it. And, in harnessing it as humans, we need to think about the ethics of harnessing it, why it matters, where it could go wrong, who it could harm, who it could benefit. And that conversation is a really important conversation at the user end. But AI, in a sense, has given us the computing power, has given us a chance to curate mountains and mountains of data that would be impossible for the human brain to assemble and to curate in a short period of time, and to come up with a reasoned response, reasoned in a algorithmic sense, to provide a gateway to understanding the nature of the problem. It won't necessarily have the answer or the only answer, but it can help prompt us into thinking about what the answers might be to a particular problem. And so people have been using AI for years, of course. The difference now is the power of our computing power and the speed of delivery. And wrestling with that is one of the big issues of our time. I was applying it to journalism,
Yeah.
saying, is it possible to gather effective information, verifiable information, lots of it, in a very short space of time to answer and explore what's happened at a particular event? Back to that conversation we were having earlier about verifiable information and whether you can trust what you're reading. Can AI help us do that? Well, as long as you've got an interaction or a workflow where you've got humans in the workflow as well as the computer, you use the computer as an aid to get you to some semblance of accuracy. Whether it's truth or not is another conversation, another whole podcast. But is it accurate? Can you get to verifiable information which helps you give an accurate articulation of the event that's happened?
Yeah.
So AI is with us to stay. It's not going. We better get on with trying to harness it, understand it, and making sure that interface with human existence is properly regulated, properly understood. Otherwise, it could do a lot of harm. Bear in mind, of course, that over the past few millennia, we've already done ourselves a lot of harm without AI. So there's no reason to assume that AI is going to be the thing that actually ends it all. If you think back just 80 years, the tragedy in Europe had nothing to do with AI. That had everything to do with humans. And it may be that AI can help us negotiate differences, understand there are different ways of doing things before we get to that type of juncture. Although it seems that there are plenty of humans around who are intent on making life difficult for other people.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think we'll have to talk to you again about AI. It's interesting because when I was at home and before Dad left, I was about 15 years old. I remember my dad worked for British Columbia Institute of Technology, and my dad was an engineer. He also was an electrician, journeyman, and he was talking about AI. They put him on a committee. This is how long ago that would have been. I was like, oh my God, if my dad was alive today, I'm sure he'd be just blowing his brains out, looking at how this is rolling out. I find the word artificial intelligence counterintuitive, but that's just my amateur brain, the way it thinks. Hey, Kurt, one more question for you, and then a couple things I want to honor you with. So thanks for giving me all your time. That is that I say this for context. So I get people who come on the show, like yourself, I get bios that are sent, and sometimes one sheets. So you have a picture, and a lot of times, unlike yours, it's somebody whose photos taken in a studio, and it's got this cheesy look, and it's all staged. It's not real. And then it's like, look how great I am. Here's all my accomplishments. And I always I look at it and go, yeah, that's nice. Because life isn't a straight line up. And in story, we know that we learn from failures, not just success. Otherwise, can't relate to people. I've had a lot of failures. And so I want to ask you to tell me what's one of your biggest mistakes or failures that led to a setback, and what did you learn from that? How did you apply that knowledge into action?
You'll see the mark on my T-shirt. It says, life is a journey. And on a journey, you will encounter many, many obstacles. And obstacles are just part of life's journey. And so you don't necessarily have to see them as failures. You see them as commas. There are no full stops in living. Life is full of commas. So I would say that, like many people, I've had failures in my life, but actually the successes in my life have not been the obvious successes. In terms of professional success, big success for me was meeting my life partner at 18. Massive success. We've been together, nearly 45 years. That has given me the foundations of courage, strength, resilience. Massive success. I couldn't ever think of a failure which even compares with such an immense success. Yeah. I have 3 gorgeous children. Massive success. One of the greatest successes in my life was delivering my 3rd child on my own, because the midwife didn't get there on time. That's just an emotion. That's an emotional success, But for me, that is part of one of the great things of my life are those moments, not necessarily the moments at the Berlin Wall or cheating death, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's the private things almost which outweigh those successes, because they're the successes which stay with you. That's your legacy.
Yeah.
You know, you've done great things, as you said, in a way. So what? It's great if you can have an impact on other people's lives. I try to live my life. I've tried to live my life with the motto: if you meet someone, make sure they're elevated by the end of the conversation. And if you can do that in life, you don't leave a wake of harm where you've traveled, then you can say that your life has been a success. But I don't like to think in terms of failure, more in terms of commas.
Thank you, Kurt. Just that story about delivering your own child blew my mind. There's so many more stories. Good Lord. I mean, everybody just listen to that. Kurt's telling us that. I'm visualizing that. My first child, my daughter, who's 26, just graduating from university, environmental engineering. I'm thinking like, holy crap. I couldn't imagine doing that. It's like, there's more to you, man.
Needs must. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say.
Yeah. A couple things, everyone. Teaching moment, the word commas. I think it's a book you need to write about commas. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Congratulations on 45 years with your partner, your wife. We're approaching 30 here, and it's my second time. So I can tell you that was one of my biggest commas and successes after that, Kurt, as well as losing my first child and then the birth of my beautiful daughter. So thank you. Listen, I want to honor you now with an award. You don't know if you knew you were going to get an award today, but you're very humble.
Je n'avais pas aucune idée, mais vous êtes français ou francophone. Donc, je suis heureux de recevoir un honneur canadien.
I know a little bit of French, man, from grade 12. I was part of me, my stupid brain was saying, he's probably saying, you're an idiot, Tom. I don't like you showing. Love it. He remembered, because everybody, if you just tuned in later, I asked Kurt to tell us to use his third language. Have you heard of the challenge coin?
The challenge coin, no.
Yeah. All right. You're supposed to say yes now.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Of course, I recall now. Yes.
All right, I'm just going to read you something here. Let you see it on the camera. Challenge coins surfaced during the World War I era. The practice of carrying a coin designed specifically for a unit was popular with the Army Special Forces, carrying the coin at all times and presenting it when challenged to prove affiliation with that unit resulted in a number of consequences for those who could not produce a coin. Most popular required the coinless soldier to buy a round of drinks. That practice continues to be popular today. So, Kurt, today, challenge coins are around the world. They have first responders, challenge coins, societies. My father in Alcoholics Anonymous, 23 years before he passed. I didn't know him for most of his life when he had recovered. They had their own version of coins. So, when I started the show, I had an idea. I wanted to bring on the 1% of people in society that I felt had a deep story that they turned into some action to make an impact on the world. But not the people who come on and say, look how great I am, I have no commas. In fact, I've had a few people I've turned from the show who weren't happy because they couldn't be vulnerable. But you're a pretty amazing guy on both sides. So this is the challenge coin for the show. The front of it, it's hand-painted and crafted, minted in the US, Canada. Beautiful. And then on the back is the hero's journey narrative, which is from Joseph Campbell's work on story. And I fell in love with Hero's Journey a decade ago. I don't show this very often, but on my left arm here, I have the Hero's Journey narrative tattooed. And I remember I put it there because in the corporate sector as a CEO, Kurt, I was embarrassed to get a tattoo. So I put it there, and I thought, well, one day I'll stand on stage and I'll say, not only is the hero's journey in me, it's on me. So I get to brag. So on that note, I'm inducting you into the Quiet Warrior community. Globally, we have these in 19 countries, and it's an honor to give it to you. We'll be sending it to you. Hope you can take a picture somewhere meaningful and send that back to me. So congratulations.
I shall certainly do that, and I received it.
My attempt at cheesy applause there. And finally, I'd like to honor you with some words. I write these on my paper. They're unscripted, and these are leadership words. There's 5 of them today that came to mind. One is Maven, Malcolm Gladwell's book, an outlier called Outliers. He talks about mavens. So if there's a man that you want to go to who knows about journalism or knows about all the things that Kurt knows, Kurt's the guy. Number 2 is worldview. You have a worldview, and I'm impressed by that in a very deep way, so thank you. Number 3, trailblazer. I think that there's a movie out there, Moneyball, and they said in that the first one through the wall gets bloody. You're a trailblazer, man. And knowledge, and the last one would be courage. Because that story of the gun to the head and delivering your own baby, if that ain't courage, I don't know what the hell is courage. So congratulations. And back to you for the last word. And this would be my question to tie into that, my good friend. Say it in German, French, or English. When you're done with this world, what will it look like? And anything you want to say to us as you leave?
When I'm ready to depart and go to the other room is what you mean, when I'm done with the world.
Yes, sir.
I hope that people will say he was a man of kindness, a man who listened, a man who made sure that when he left people, he left them more contented, with greater equilibrium, that he was a man who wore his heart on his sleeve, but also a man who showed good, sound judgment when the facts were before him. And that actually, towards the end of his life, he decided that he wanted to give back as a educator to make sure that the next generation didn't stumble into the world with ignorance. They went into the world with courage and leadership. And finally, that he was a man who brought people together, that he showed people that it was possible to negotiate difference. It was possible to be other, but to negotiate with somebody who is other, you need to discover the other within. If I do all that, I will have done a good job, and I'll sleep well.
Thank you for that, Kurt. Everybody, did you just hear that come back? That whole segment is a teaching moment. I'm almost thinking that should be put into words and sent to you. So whoever does your eulogy, God bless them, will read that and say, this is the kind of man that this Kurt Barling was. So thank you, Kurt, for being here. Everybody, live that life with true passion. Live the life that you deserve and live the life that you desire, just like you hear here from Professor Kurt Barling. Kurt, thanks for being on the show. We'll have you back again if you'll come.
Pleasure to have been here. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca